Jonathan Conricus, thanks for joining us. Tell us your reaction to what happened yesterday at the Nasser Hospital in the Gaza Strip.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for having me on again. Sad, unfortunate incident where Israeli troops, according to what I understand from the preliminary investigation, Israeli troops misidentified a bunch of journalists and other people who were pointing cameras and lenses towards where the Israeli soldiers were. Israeli soldiers misinterpreted that and thought that they were hostiles and directed fire towards them. There are still a few question marks that remain, specifically, why was that mistake made? And two, why was a second strike ordered, which also unfortunately killed a few of the rescue workers that came in order to rescue the people who were wounded in the first strike. I understand that the IDF is taking responsibility for it, has acknowledged the mistake, has said that there is an investigation ongoing. And what I hope is that we'll be able to have findings and conclusions and something to show the world after that investigation, and to do that quickly, because this is one of these rare instances where Israel has an opportunity to acknowledge a mistake and strengthen its credibility by actually taking action and showing that we're serious about our morals and values. And when mistakes happen, we own up to them.
Yeah, as you said, the Prime Minister's office has apologized. What are the challenges that the IDF faces when they dealing with Hamas, in particular, Hamas's use of hospitals?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question, a question that I think is missing from most American media coverage. And that is, you know, Chris, before October 7, there were almost 40 hospitals in Gaza. When Israeli troops started fighting in Gaza against Hamas, what they encountered in each and every hospital was that Hamas fighters, terrorists, were abusing hospitals for combat activity. And there's lots and lots of video footage and evidence of Hamas fighters firing from within hospital compounds, conducting command and control from within and underneath hospitals, using hospitals to hide Israeli hostages, and in every other sense, abusing that sacred and protected special status of hospitals. So when this event happened yesterday, the context is that Israeli soldiers are used to seeing Hamas and other terrorists use hospitals illegally in violation of international law when they are fighting. So that's why Israeli soldiers thought that, well, this is just another case of Hamas terrorists that are using hospitals. That is probably why they decided to strike it. So it's a very, very challenging environment. I dare say perhaps the most challenging and complex environment that we've seen in post-World War II, where it is extremely difficult to distinguish between friend and foe and combatant and non-combatant. And of course, Hamas does everything it can in order to muddy those waters and make it very difficult for Israeli soldiers to clearly classify who is an enemy and who isn't. The abuse of hospitals is one such example. The abuse of press protection, journalists with the press vests and helmets is another one. We've seen a systemic abuse by Hamas of journalist cover, which continues until today.
Israel right now is on the precipice of Gideon's Chariots, Operation 2. How would you describe where the IDF is right now on the cusp, the very verge of Gaza City, to try to encircle it?
Yeah, so what the IDF has done is to place troops in around Gaza City in order to send a very clear message to Hamas, to the three countries that support Hamas and give it the lifeline that it needs, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, and to signal to them that we are serious. If you don't give us back all of our hostages, if you don't end the war, and if you don't surrender, then what we, Israel, will do, and we're serious about it, is we will go in and we will find you where you are and where we haven't yet operated at a high level, which is Gaza City and a few locations in the central part of the Gaza Strip. I think that the window for diplomacy and negotiations is still open. It is narrowing, but it is still open. And I think that had Israel wanted to just go in and get it done, we would have done it a few days or a week ago. But I think that Israel is waiting in order for diplomacy to perhaps make it unnecessary for Israel to go in and do what it needs to do in order to defeat Hamas and get the hostages back. It doesn't seem as if it's impressing the three countries that are supporting Hamas, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey enough. But maybe Hamas will understand that it's either this choice or the complete destruction of every infrastructure that they have in Gaza, and of course with a lot of collateral damage, which they eventually will bear the responsibility for. Time will tell.
What are the challenges that Israel is facing if it does go into Gaza City? And is this Hamas's last major stronghold?
Well, physically, it is Hamas's last major stronghold, and there are some pockets of Gaza City where the IDF has not yet operated above and below ground. What the IDF will encounter is an enemy that will have had lots and lots of time to prepare, to plant lots of booby traps, to rig buildings full of explosives, to prepare and refurnish tunnels, tactical tunnels that Hamas will use for close quarter mobility, and the bigger strategic tunnels that they will use to move from one neighborhood or one city to another. And it's going to be a very difficult, high intensity, high casualty environment. What Israel will try to do is to get civilians out of the way first. And the first part of the campaign will be a messaging campaign by Israel instructing civilians in Gaza to evacuate to the south, to the humanitarian areas, to the humanitarian centers where they can also receive food and medical supply in the southwestern parts of the Gaza Strip, where, by the way, there's an American NGO providing them with hundreds of thousands of meals per day, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund. And once enough civilians will have evacuated, main combat operations will begin. My guess is that they will be very intense, lots of use of standoff fire, and that there will be a rolling curtain of fire advancing before Israeli troops. I think that the tolerance in Israeli society for Israeli casualties operating, clearing houses and exposing themselves to booby-trapped houses is very low. And as such, the tactics that the IDF will use once civilians are out of the way will be to rely more on fire, and then to have infantry and armor go in and kind of sweep up what's left and deal with the remaining pockets, and of course fight underground in the tunnels where Hamas is, but perhaps not only to fight, but actually flush them out.
You mentioned the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. How important is that to undermine the sort of the monopoly that Hamas has had over food distribution inside Gaza?
It's crucial. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has shown through the leadership of Reverend Johnny Moore and many other professionals, brave American patriots and professionals that work in that organization, that it is possible to provide clean, healthy, dignified food to civilians in Gaza without Hamas or corrupt UN organizations profiting from it. And, there's been an ongoing slander campaign led by UN institutions and with a lot of complicity in international media against the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. You can see that through their steadfastness and their commitment to the mission, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has been able to withstand that. And today they are on the ground. There are 4 active centers, and others are being built and prepared. Hundreds of thousands of meals are being delivered every day. More than 110 million meals have been provided to Gazans so far by the GHF, and that is without benefiting the oppressors of Gaza, which is Hamas. So I would say super important, and I give them tremendous credit for what they're doing. If anything will bring Hamas down, I think it is the combination of there being an alternative for distribution of food, military pressure by Israel, and the three countries that support Hamas and give Hamas the lifeline and diplomatic and financial cover that they currently enjoy, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, for them to decide not to do so and actually tell Hamas that your time is up, your role, your horrible, negative, destructive role in the history of the Middle East is now over, and your only option is to surrender and vacate Gaza, because you are bringing nothing but destruction and suffering to civilians there, and you must leave.
Yeah. I had the opportunity last week, Jonathan, actually to see the GHF in action. It's amazing operation they have. It's like a military precision, the way they distribute food. In another instance today that Australia has evicted Iranian diplomats, saying that they are planning dangerous operations. What's your reaction to Australia's action against the IRGC?
Yeah, finally something positive out of Australia after 2 years of mass anti-Semitism erupting on Australian streets. A very lackluster performance by local law enforcement, failing to protect their Australian Jewish citizens who live there, who are loyal, proud Australian patriots. And they feel very unsafe. And finally, we see authorities in Australia take a positive decision, not only to do what needs to be done, but actually to say it out in the open and call evil by its name. The Islamic Republic of Iran is interfering in Australian business. It is conducting a terror campaign on Iranian soil. And the Australians are now aware of it and have called the Iranians out. I think it's long overdue, but better late than never. And it joins the list of many other countries, Northern European countries, Germany, Scandinavia, the UK, and of course the US, that say very clearly that the Islamic Republic of Iran is conducting clandestine, illegal operations on foreign soil designed to target Jewish people, Israeli civilians, and of course, Iranian dissidents. And the sooner more pressure is brought to bear on that rogue and horrible regime, the Iranian Islamic Republic, is better. And I commend Australian authorities for doing so. It would be good if they would focus on real things like Iranian terrorism on Australian soil and not meddling in Israeli and Middle Eastern politics with a very full-hearted recognition of a Palestinian state in a premature and, frankly, non-helpful way.
Yeah, Amnesty International in another front is saying that what Israel is doing by creating a buffer zone around the Gaza Strip is actually a war crime. Your reaction to that?
Sadly, Amnesty has, in my mind, lost all relevance. It has no bearing. They have really dug a hole so deep and undermined their own legitimacy. They seem to be, to me, an organization that is irrationally focused on Israel, which has double and triple standards and constantly singles out Israel for condemnation, many times based on false documentation from the ground by anti-Israeli NGOs or by Hamas sources or by staff that are BDS supporters, by choosing to cherry pick and misinterpret international law, specifically only against the only democracy in the Middle East fighting against terrorism. And a long time ago, I stopped listening to their communiques. I think they've lost their way. And I think everything that they say is motivated by a political objective against the Jewish state of Israel and by nothing else. They are not about human rights. If they were about human rights, if they were about preventing civilian suffering, their number one target should be the Hamas terrorists that rule and oppress the Gaza Strip, that are the main culprits, that are the main oppressors and the abusers of civil rights in Gaza since they came to power in 2007. And they shouldn't be making these false allegations about Israel. For Israel to have a buffer zone is, I think, the bare minimum that Israel needs in order to defend itself and to prevent a future October 7. So I think it's a ridiculous and unfounded and unprofessional, wholly politically motivated allegation by an organization that has lost its way.
Yeah. You mentioned about Australia declaring a Palestinian state. That will go along with France, the UK, Canada, and maybe others next month at the General Assembly. Your reaction to what they propose to have a Palestinian state?
Well, I think it's not helpful. It helps Hamas. It makes it more difficult to end the war. It makes it more difficult for Israel to get our hostages back. It continues and strengthens the hand of Hamas against the Palestinian Authority and against Israel, and it will make it more difficult for Israel to get rid of Hamas. I think those statements are very naive. They are quite colonial and condescending. They appear to have the only solution to the problem, but they're not listening to the people who have skin in the game. Palestinians don't want a two-state solution, and after October 7, I dare say that most Israelis don't want a two-state solution because the Palestinians don't. And trying to impose an external solution on us isn't going to help, isn't going to be successful, and it is actually making things worse. And I think, if anything, it will probably strengthen the extreme parts of Israeli society who say, well, if this is what they do, the Europeans do, after Israel sustains the worst attack it has ever sustained from one of its enemies on October 7, and they are rewarding them with the recognition of statehood, then why not go ahead and do all that we want to do, annex or apply Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, all of Eastern Jerusalem, and do whatever we feel that we need to do, because we're going to be condemned anyhow. So I think it's not helpful. I think it's very bad politics, very naive, foolish, and regretful. And I think it's mostly for Palestinians, for Gazans. It continues their suffering. It makes them suffer more because it strengthens Hamas's hand. If anybody thinks that recognizing a Palestinian state after October 7 will strengthen the so-called moderates in Palestinian society, which I don't know who they are because they're not politically represented, they are totally wrong, because the organization that will really run a campaign on this, and rightfully so, will be Hamas. And their slogan will be jihad equals statehood. The path of armed fighting, of terror against Israelis, and to fight against the Jews by the power of the sword, by killing, raping, burning, and mutilating. That is the path forward, and that will bring us success. And that is what Hamas will say. And they will say it with quite a lot of justification, since the Europeans are really handing them this silver platter to use in the next elections. That's why it's so important that Israel defeats Hamas and that Hamas isn't around as a political alternative in the future.
You've worked with the international media a lot during your time with the IDF as the international spokesman. How would you analyze the way they've treated perhaps yesterday's incident as well as they have throughout the war?
I mean, yesterday's incident is kind of an extreme. It's a perfect storm in a negative sense, because you have civilians, journalists that were wrongfully targeted or mistakenly targeted by the IDF in a hospital. It doesn't get any better for Hamas or for the detractors of Israel. The only thing missing would be orphans and women and disabled people, and then it would be really all that Hamas could dream of in terms of something that would undermine the legitimacy of the state of Israel. I think that in general, in this specific event, I can understand why this is getting a lot of attention. Stringers were working for American media and other international recognized media. But I think what is missing, and what's, again, a poor performance by international media, is the context. I've been watching CNN, BBC, AP, Reuters, and many others, and I haven't seen the context of Hamas up until today has systematically abused hospitals in Gaza, and as such, it wasn't a bizarre thought for Israeli soldiers to assume that Hamas was doing it again in the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. But unfortunately, we have become accustomed with pretty biased and one-sided analysis and reporting. This case isn't different. This is just bigger magnitude and a louder event. sadly. It's really a ripe fruit that falls in the hands of anybody who has issue with the state of Israel defending itself and fighting against Hamas in Gaza.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Jonathan?
It's a long way forward, but I think Israel has proven that it has the stamina, the capacity, the fighting capability in order to overcome our enemies. I think that very positive things are happening in Lebanon, where there's local leadership, the president, prime minister, even the speaker of the parliament, that for the first time in Lebanese history are starting to exercise Lebanese sovereignty and control over all of Lebanon, and to take the fate of the state of Lebanon and the people of Lebanon into Lebanese hands, and to take control over Lebanon away from Syrians and Iranians and other external forces. And I think that's positive. Hezbollah needs to be dismantled. It needs to be disarmed. And I strengthen the efforts being done by the Lebanese government. And I'm also happy to see that Israel is allowing diplomacy and allowing the tremendous and brave efforts conducted by the US, by the United States of America, through diplomatic channels, by envoys Ortegas and others, to bring about the change in Lebanon and to bring really stability and the chances of prosperity by taking the weapons out of the hands of Hezbollah. Super important. And hopefully we will be able to look back at this time in history in a few years in the future and say that this was another great peacekeeping and peace-creating mission by President Trump, by his administration, and by the United States.
Well, a glimmer of hope there in Lebanon. Jonathan Conricus, thanks so much for joining us and your analysis after many years of experience.
Thank you.